Yeah, I actually was fortunate enough to be invited to Trump International in West Palm. This is his home course. It was an interesting experience, to say the least. So, no, I don't think we've seen even the beginning of the end of gold's rally. I think most of the southern and eastern hemisphere are looking at this pullback as a gift.
It's an absurdity, really, to be taxing something just because it's maintaining its purchasing power.
The reality is, what the hell do we have military bases in these countries for anyway after all of these years?
Putin has called the bluff of the West and said, I'm just going to walk into this country because what are you going to do about it?
We have foot the bill for too much of the world, for NATO, for protecting the world, for being the policeman of the world, and giving money to the world at our own expense. So I don't have problems with this protectionist attitude. I don't at all.
You can't rely on central banks to be able to save you. You can't rely on any government to be able to save you. You've got to take control of your own life. Welcome to the Resilient Compass. And with me today, of course, is my co-host, the Bullion Baron himself, Andy Schectman. Hi, Andy. How are you doing?
Good to see you, brother. I like that. The Bullion Baron. I think I'm going to get a t-shirt made with that. The Bullion Baron.
Yeah, man. You're the man when it comes to the bullion, getting it delivered into your hands, the gold bars or the coins. But listen, what a week it's been, and talking about quite a seismic week. You were actually obviously based in Florida. I think you were golfing on the day of the election. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually was fortunate enough to be invited to Trump International in West Palm. This is his home course. It was an interesting experience, to say the least. Now, he wasn't there. I thought he might be. Every time I've been there before, I've seen him. It was an interesting time to be there. Very optimistic time with all the patrons there. And not only that, honestly, it's the nicest golf course I've played in Florida by a long margin. So
for those of you who had your heads in the sand, who didn't realize Trump has won the US presidential election, leaving everyone on the edge of their seats, the atmosphere is one, I would say, of anticipation and uncertainty, both politically and economically. US elections are always a major event, and with Trump in the White House, there's going to be a significant shift, I think, in the landscape. And today, what we're going to try and do, Andy, I think, is just break down and discuss the implications for the economy and precious metals and the precious metals market. And I think maybe should we start with Doge? And just for those of you out there who don't know, Doge, I'm not referring to the cryptocurrency that was created by Billy Marcus and Jackson Palmer, who decided to create a payment system as a joke, and which has subsequently been supported by Trump a lot. Sorry, not by Trump, by Musk a lot of times. But I'm talking about the Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, which the role is to see Doge playing real. The idea, I think, is to create real actual economic efficiency, or certainly within government, try and cut costs. But I suppose the question on a lot of people's minds is the Department of Government Efficiency, where I think it's not just Musk, I think it's Ramaswamy as well, acting as kind of advisors or Doge czars to the administration. They obviously have talked a lot about government efficiency, haven't they, and wanting to make cuts and the ability to make huge cuts. Trump came out, I think, yesterday or today saying, look, they're going to get rid of a lot of people in government, but don't worry, you'll have 2-year severance. They don't want to be mean. But is this symbolic? Is this real? Is it symbolic? Is it just a political gesture? Do you think they can cut trillions of dollars off the government expenditure?
I don't know that they can cut trillions of dollars. I think it's largely symbolic. The Congressional Budget Office said that even if we had a balanced budget today, they said that the cost, the interest alone on the debt, if we take all of the income tax by the year 2030, just because of the massive amount of debt and the inability to stop our reckless spending, has created an environment where that you have 100% of all tax revenue by 2031 will go just to pay the interest on the debt, the national debt, and mandatory entitlement spending, and which is Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, and which basically says that 100% of all the discretionary spending would have to be borrowed. You're talking military as an example, which is discretionary. So yes, it would be an important thing to do, but when you look at cutting 400, 500, 600 billion of salary or of waste, it's a drop in the bucket. compared to how much debt we truly have. And we're not even talking the unfunded liabilities.
Are you enjoying the show? A quick reminder then to hit the subscribe button so you can be kept up to date about future episodes. Now, back to the show.
Of Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, government military pensions. So yes, it's a good thing. It's a step in the right direction. Smaller government, more efficiency. But I don't know, just the loss in tax revenue from all of those jobs that they're cutting. They added 700,000 government jobs 2 payrolls ago, 700,000 over 2 payrolls ago. And then this last one, where they said there was only 12,000 jobs added, they forgot to mention 28,000 private sector jobs were replaced with 40,000 government jobs that we can't afford. So you're talking almost 800,000 jobs were added over the past government jobs over the past 2 payroll reports, and that's on top of the bloated numbers. So you take 4, 5, 6, 700 $billion if you get that far and cut programs and fire people, and just the loss of tax revenue from those people in and of itself will offset half of the cost cutting that they're doing. So I think they would have to really chop and you have fighting against constituents who are getting programs, government subsidies of sort. And it's very difficult to cut those programs, to cut those subsidies. It's not popular to be the politician that, in essence, imposes austerity. Yeah, I don't know. I look at it as symbolic, but it's a step in the right direction. Certainly, our government has gotten far too big, far too bloated, far too inefficient. It's a good place to start and hopefully continue to streamline things.
Yeah, the other thing about it is that actually it's been one of the ways the governments have successive governments have stimulated the economy, isn't it? By actually spending on government. In fact,
Right.
those people who work for the government, hiring all those extra people, those people go out and spend money.
Right.
It's another way of getting money into the economy. So taking that out of the economy, they're obviously, in theory, I presume they're thinking that they replace this with more efficient, more
Private sector.
capitalistic type private sector jobs rather than those other ones.
And over time, it would play out that way, I think. But in the short term, no, it's not. It's more symbolic than meaningful. But over time, it would work. And you have to, every journey starts with a step, right? So it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, we'll see. Musk obviously has a reputation of being able to do things efficiently and get things done with much lower resources and less resources than everybody else. So we'll have to see. But I think today, what's interesting, what we're talking about here, the kind of challenges which this administration have, whatever your political views, whether you were for Trump or not for Trump, at the end of the day, they've got some gigantic issues here that they're trying to solve for. The next thing, I suppose, is the economic. The next thing I was going to talk about were tariffs. Trump is planning to increase tariffs again, which could create tensions in international trade. There's a Bloomberg report that's come out that mentions a slow rollout of these new tariffs. I don't know if that's true or not. We've got to think about what do we think about this when it comes to the economy.
It will benefit some sectors, like the auto manufacturing sector. But tariffs are traditionally done to protect industries, domestic industries. But we don't have those domestic industries anymore. We've offshored them. We've offshored so much of our manufacturing and production. In essence, we're not protecting we can't protect what we don't have. In essence, you're imposing a tax on your citizens.
Yeah, effectively, the US has, lots of Western countries have done this since we came off the gold standard. We've exported our inflation to these cheaper economies like in China and India to produce that for us. We don't have those industries, as you say, anymore. And presumably, he wants the money from companies that have been the companies that have been offshore. He wants that money to come home. He wants that money to be invested in the country to develop those industries in the country. But presumably that's going to take time, isn't it?
Lots of time to bring the factories home, to modernize them, to equip them, to train the workers. And that's a lot easier said than done. But here again, you need to take one step at a time. I would argue that the last administration, in many ways, has done more to damage this country than any external foe ever could. So I think there's lots of reason to be optimistic with what President Trump wants to do. And I admire how fast he's rolling these things out, and to the degree of ambition that he's throwing into the mix to try and make this country a better country. So I don't count people out like Elon Musk, and I don't begrudge the ambition. I just think that it's a pretty heavy lift. And at the onset, I think what happens is that you'll just see these countries like India just devalue their currency, make their currency worth less to in order to not feel the pain so much.
Mm.
And I think you'll also see situations where they'll just raise their prices at the same time to offset the to offset
The
the
increased input
tariff.
costs.
And so
Yeah.
if they want a weak dollar and low interest rates, these countries faced with tariffs will just drop their currency proportionately to
Mm.
fight the weak dollar. And at the same time, they will also raise their prices on their goods to pass on the cost of the tariff to the consumer. And that's
Mm.
what will happen if we don't have industries that we're protecting. In essence, we're buying from these people, just paying a higher price, buying from these countries.
Yeah, I suppose at the end of the day, new tariffs coming this way. It's a protectionist strategy. What impact will they have? It's a gamble, I think, on international trade that could cost not just America, but the whole world if the whole world goes into a protectionist strategy.
Well,
And at the
I
end,
mean, in an idealistic world, I'd rather see that. I'd rather see us close the borders, close our military bases, bring everybody home, and worry about ourselves, be the engine of production and manufacturing, and employ as much as we are doing to protect the world, protect our own country. I don't know if that will happen, but yeah, I think his policies, while there are reasons to be very optimistic, at the same time, they ought to be very inflationary. You're talking about 8 billion and 8 trillion in I think it's 8 trillion. I'm pretty sure that's what I wrote down here. 8 trillion in, yes, it is. 8 trillion in tax rollbacks. You're talking a few trillion in tariff. You're talking lowering of interest rates. This will make your currency weaker. This will create inflation. This will be good for, again, this is the Cantillon effect that we've talked about so much, where this stimulus is going to impact the 1%. You can see it already on Wall Street, on cryptocurrencies. You can see it in assets that are going to go much higher. And that's very inflationary. This is a risk on environment all of a sudden. And the inflationary impact ought to be a gift for the pullback we've seen in gold and silver. And I want to address that just for a moment because, look, whether or not people think the price of gold and silver has been managed by the West, it doesn't bother me if they don't. I would just simply say it's irrefutable. It has been, and it is. And there are lots of reasons why they manage it. But there have been a handful of commercial banks that have been getting absolutely murdered on COMEX and the LBMA with these very entrenched short positions. This gave them the option the opportunity with the irrational exuberance that we see surrounding the Trump victory. And I want to comment on the exuberance in a moment, but they've used that as an opportunity to push the price of gold and silver down the hill a bit, which then triggered the sell orders by all of the hedge funds and their algorithms. And the hedge funds are now shifting to risk on assets like Bitcoin, like stocks. And it's allowed them to normalize their books and to clear off all of these shorts, or many of them that have been burying them in massive losses. And I think the irrational exuberance, it's irrational on some levels, but after what we've lived through over the last 4 years, the bizarro world what we've lived in, where everything that we've talked about, where your value is not by your merit and how hard you work and equal opportunity, but by your lifestyle and equality for all, where people question the integrity of the electoral system, the judicial system, the immigration system, the lawlessness, the wokeness, all of this stuff, the cancel culture, the censorship, it's driven everyone nuts except the far left who's embraced it. It's driven most people, even in the center, nuts. Really? This is not the country I grew up in. What's going on? And I think people have had enough of it. And that is part of the reason. Not only you see so much red there, my old home state of Minnesota is blue, which I'm very upset about. But what do you expect? It's Governor Walz. And as a vice president candidate. So I suppose that's to be explained. But look, the bottom line is I think that factors into it too. People just have a breath of fresh air that, oh my gosh, maybe we can go back to the ideals that made this country special. And that's, I think, part of it. But at the same time, people are overlooking what I think will be a massive inflationary event of lower interest rates, a weaker dollar, which weakens the purchasing power, which brings into the Cantillon effect because the purchasing power of the dollar goes down, inflation goes up. The assets that the wealthy have purchased and that are able to purchase again through pivoting with interest rates and bringing them down, it's the same mistake we've made over and over again.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, I don't see it getting better. In fact, maybe even worse. But from everything else, maybe the safety and the quality of life, at least to the way we used to be, or mirroring what we used to be, I think that is something to be very happy and optimistic about. But in terms of owning gold and silver, I think it's never been more important to own it.
Yeah, I think with the tariffs coming in, bringing the money home, investments in the factories onshore within the US, the costs are going to ramp up massively. You can't build a microwave in the US in the same price you can buy it in China. As you say, that's going to drive inflation up. Interest rates will have to go up in order to try and keep a lid on the inflation. The Fed only just recently reversed their interest rate stance and started to relax. But I think they're going to have to stop that policy. Interest rates will remain high. And of course, that means the debt interest will build up at the Fed as well. Already the third biggest expense above the defense budget. So I think investors will take on a policy of protecting themselves from inflation.
Don't forget about the banks whose balance sheets are already in tatters, and now rates go up again on the 10-year. They tried to lower the front end of the curve by 75 basis points, and the 10 and the 30 went up more than that over the corresponding period of time. So you can lower the federal funds rate all you want, but the bond market is saying, no, you're trapped. You're trapped because you're not going to lower rates on the back end. We're not going to accept, not only do we know you're lying about your measurements of inflation and money creation, but we're not going to wait 10 years and only take 4.5% on a treasury. You're going to have to give us more than that. And that's ultimately where we go. I wouldn't be surprised to see the 10-year yield over 5% by the time he takes office, and much higher shortly thereafter. So yeah, these are challenges that the market will face. And the old mantra, higher rates are bad for gold. That's nonsense. We watch gold go higher and higher and higher nonstop with 5% rates on 6-month treasuries.
Yeah, something's definitely dislocated in the market over
the
the last 2
10-year
years.
treasury, who wants it at 5%? Who cares? It's different on the 6 months. So no, I don't think we've seen even the beginning of the end of gold's rally. I think most of the southern and eastern hemisphere are looking at this pullback as a gift. I think people should look at it that way, because ultimately this administration will do what every other one has done, and that is to choose inflation over austerity, over the difficult decisions. So yes, they may cut some stuff that probably won't be felt by average Americans, and I hope they do a lot of that. But no, inflation is here to stay.
And just going back to those bonds we were talking about before, just so people understand, when interest rates go up, those bonds become worth less, don't they?
Right. Yes, interest rates and bond values move inverse of one another.
Yeah. So as people start to see that interest rates are not coming down, they're going to be thinking twice about where is the safe haven. During the 2008 crisis, it was government treasuries. During COVID, it was government treasuries. But we've seen now, since interest rates are going up, that's dislocated now. It's not the solution for people. Where do they park their money? Where is the safe haven? Of course, we know where it is. We know where the world is choosing to put their money. That's why the price is going on. Not just consumers, not just businesses, but central banks themselves.
And I think you hit it on the nail on the head there. We'll talk about Judy in a second, but it's less about the de-dollarization. Of course, it's important. The transacting in dollars is very important, but it's more along the lines that's more relevant to this country is where all these countries, what are they doing with their excess reserves? They used to put it into U.S. treasuries, which would finance our lifestyle, keep interest rates low, strengthen our economy, strengthen the bond market. That's not happening. They're buying gold and commodities in place of it and transacting in local currencies. So you have the dual threat of not only de-dollarization, but also of lack of bond sales. And you bring up Judy Shelton there. I better put these on so I can see. Yeah, Judy Shelton is awesome because not only is she a gold bug and a gold standard advocate. But she said the most logical thing I've heard a politician say in a long time, and that is, who the hell wants to buy our duration treasuries? The only way you'll get people to really inspire any confidence, rather, in the treasuries is to back them by gold. And she said that. I've never heard a politician say anything that's heresy, for God's sakes. And yet she said, back it by gold, have it redeemable in gold, and you will get people buy the 30-year treasury. And I think it makes tremendous, perfect sense. You back the 10-year treasury with gold, or the 30-year treasury with gold, rather, you will, for the first time in a few years, have a rekindled interest in our treasury debt.
Yeah, and of course, one of the other problems that, if you think it through in terms of what I was saying before about tariffs stopping the import of products, increasing the cost of goods, increasing inflation, interest rates going up. Normally in that environment, if the economies, though, if those businesses, the US businesses in the economy are doing well, then of course there's no need for stimulus. But there's lots of reasons why there might need to be stimulus, what we've been discussing. Of course, there are businesses in the US that won't do well with the tariffs, but also the treasuries, if the treasuries aren't being bought, at some point we might get to the situation where the Fed has to step in and buy those treasuries, and we're back to quantitative easing as well. So presumably that means, again, doubling down on inflation, maybe potentially back to a situation where there's businesses aren't doing well, that's stagflation. I'm looking ahead at all these different challenges, and it's very difficult to see where the way forward. It's very easy for us to go, yeah, great, this new administration is going to bring all these changes in and create and solve all the problems. But these are very difficult problems to solve, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And not only that, I think the economy they are inheriting, they've been lied to. We've all been lied to. And in terms of what they're inheriting, the unemployment numbers are much higher than they say. The inflation numbers are much higher than they say. The problems are much deeper than everyone is being led to believe. At the same time, we've weaponized the treasury market. People don't want to hold our treasuries anymore because not only do they have inflation and default risk, at the same time, they also have weaponization risk or sanction risk. And Trump is not saying the right things to try to re-inspire that confidence. He's saying, if you try and move away from the dollar, we'll sanction you. We're going to put tariffs right across the board. And we're choosing inflation. It's very obvious. We're choosing inflation over austerity by lowering rates, going for a weak dollar, and stimulus in the form of lower rates.
But is that maybe the end game though? Is if it's impossible to cut the debt because it's just so big, and even making massive cuts across government is not going to reduce it. It just might make it grow less. Is that the strategy that they've got to inflate themselves out? We've got to run inflation at 5-10% for the next 4 or 5 years, make a trillion feel less of a.
You could do that. Here again, there's a Cantillon effect for you again, and we could do that. Could do that. My mentor, Richard Russell, always said there are two choices: you can inflate or you can default. I would add option 3, and that would be to revalue the price of gold. And I think that's something they notice. We've talked about this, that the head of the Dutch National Bank has been advocating for this. And of course, Senator Loomis from Wyoming has talked about this, as she said it in the context of funding a strategic Bitcoin account right after Trump spoke in Tennessee at the Bitcoin meeting. She gets up and says, I'm going to float a bill to Congress that we revalue the gold held on behalf of the Treasury at the Fed. And we are going to revalue it to a level strong enough, high enough to take a portion of that revaluation to buy Bitcoin for the strategic account. I think if you raise and look, we're right on the doorstep of Bitcoin at $100,000. Why couldn't gold be at 100,000? You put gold at 100,000. Tell the world any gold delivered to the Treasury will be paid $100,000. You could offset very quickly the majority of the debt that you owe on your balance sheet with an asset. It would put us in a much stronger position. Is it something they notice? Sure. It would be inflationary. Sure. It's better than outright default. It's better than outright hyperinflation. So I don't know. I think that's the pattern everyone's chosen since the beginning of time. That's why coins have ridges on them, because the Romans would cut right around the diameter of the coin to make it just a little bit smaller. If you do that to enough coins, you have enough shavings to make more coins. By the end, they were taking all the precious metals out of it.
Well, they cut holes in them in the end. They were like,
yes, and you can see those ridges right
new
there.
Design.
Yes, yeah. That mean that the coin hadn't been trimmed. Yes, that's what politicians have done through all time, and that is to choose inflation over austerity. So when you look at it in the respect of owning treasuries, you have a government that will inflate, you have a government that will sanction, that will perhaps steal your treasury debt if we don't align ideologically, and the policies that they are, their monetary policy, their fiscal policy will be one of inflation. So holding 10-year treasuries or 30-year treasuries to me are uninvestable unless you bring Judy Shelton into the fold. And I hope she makes it as one of the Fed governors. She probably won't take over for Powell, who has 2 years left, but it would be nice to get a little sanity into the Federal Reserve and move to sound money. I don't know that it will happen, but I will say that the only way to ever tie gold to a currency, a central bank digital currency as an example, would be to revalue the price much, much, much higher. James Rickard says you peg it to M1, the 8,300 metric tons we have, it's $27,000. There are others say it would be much higher using M2. So I don't know. All I can tell you is that, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I think just for those people who don't know who Judy Shelton is, she's an American economic advisor to to President Trump. She's known for her advocacy for return to the gold standard. She's on the record constantly saying that the dollar needs to be backed by gold again, and that the Federal Reserve needs reform in order to save the US dollar. And I think, and we'll talk about this in a second, but I think that this plays into the initiatives that the states are doing in terms of making gold legal tender as well.
No thanks to you and your efforts to help do that, which is something people should thank you for. And because yes, you're building a good business, but you're also helping this country, and hopefully we do move into that direction. But yeah, I think we've gotten to that point where that money, the fiat money, Keynesian and economic experiment is coming to an end. And
yeah,
the lack of trust, I think, is extraordinary. You have to peg it to something in order for people to ever trust it again.
Yeah, it's just for those of you who haven't been listening to our podcast and who might not know, there are 20 odd states. I think now actually there are 30 thinking about it in discussions about making gold and silver legal tender. And you might say, haven't some of the states already done that? They might have done that with gold and silver specie. These are the gold and silver eagles, for instance, the coins minted by the Fed. And of course, you can't really use those to pay for things in Starbucks, etc. And the IRS they're just collectibles as a result. So we're going to tax them. In fact, we're going to tax them as collectibles, which is a higher rate than capital gains tax you get elsewhere. But this movement that the US states are doing is utilizing the constitutional right the states have to enable gold as money, as transactional money, because Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the US Constitution says that no state, it forbids any state to make anything a currency except gold and silver. And these US states, of course, have been looking at this government debt, $35 trillion going up, a trillion every 100 days. And they're terribly worried about it. They're worried about the way this polycrisis is unfolding, and they're worried about what it means for the economy, for their citizens. And I'm pretty confident they are going to stand up transactional gold legislation in the new year, during the next legislative session in January, February, March to June. And we're going to see across the country, US states authorizing gold and silver as legal tender and standing up platforms to enable people to even pay their taxes in gold, to make transactions like we do with Glint, with a Glint debit card or peer-to-peer using the Glint app, and giving people a choice to be able to save in something reliable and secure, and that tends to protect you from inflation, whilst it's still at this time still being able to spend in dollars and also save and use dollars alongside it. So it's an additional choice.
Which is big, especially in an environment of failing banks, like we saw in Lindsay, Oklahoma a few weeks ago, where $7 million of uninsured deposits, half of which is now gone, probably forever, leaving money in a banking system that to me is on razor's edge. That was a trial balloon, in my opinion, that they threw that out there. They've done very little in terms of alerting the public. You see virtually no press on it, and yet half of the uninsured deposits are gone. To me, it's a very ominous sign. Why weren't they more vocal about this bank failing and the deposits being, in essence, bailed in? Is it something that they want to be able to exploit down the road? I don't know, but I find it odd, peculiar to say the least, that there hasn't been more press on it. Virtually none. In fact, I just did an interview right before I was on with you with Vince Lancy, one of the smartest guys I know, one of my go-to sources for information. He hadn't even heard about it. That's just ridiculous. That not that he hasn't heard about it because he works his ass off and studies and is very smart. But
He needs to listen to the Resilient podcast.
Yeah, and there's no news of it. It should be
No.
so front and center that everyone has heard of it. Most people don't even know what a bail-in is. So yeah, it's a scary thing. You know, when Silicon Valley Bank failed, they had hundreds of millions of dollars of uninsured deposits that were covered. This one, 7 million were taken half.
Yeah. You know, I think the states are watching this. The states understand the problems and the poly crisis. And I think what's interesting is that whereas a huge amount of confidence I've seen over the last year and this grassroots movement moving into the established movement at the treasurer level, at Treasury Department level, the legislators, even in Utah, you saw Randy Quarles, the former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Gary Crittenden, former CFO of American Express, on their work group actually saying, yeah, look, yeah, they were saying that they didn't think the dollar was any risk of losing its position anytime soon. But they said, look, it's still a good idea to allow citizens to be able to use gold as money, not have it taxed with capital gains, it's a moral absurdity, really, to be taxing something just because it's maintaining its purchasing power. But I think what might be extra exciting for these states and for the legislators as they go into the legislative session is that they know that Trump is being very vocal in supporting state constitutional rights and sovereignty. And so I think that stance might give additional support to the states as they go to pass this legislation. When they see that platforms like Blint actually make it very easy to do, then they think they're unlikely to get pushback from the federal government now that Trump's in power. I think it's just doubling down on the success factors for this to all happen next year. So we're really excited about it. I know everybody involved is really excited about that. But let's move on now, I think, to you were talking to me before the show about Japan and what Trump's victory might mean for Japan. Can you can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I found it very interesting, especially in context for the BRICS, because Japan, member of the G7, a Western ally. I was very surprised to hear what came out of the mouth of a man named Takashi Kawakami. Sorry, Takashi, if I blew up your last name there, but he is the principal foreign policy advisor to the Japanese prime minister and says that now that Trump has won the presidential election, it will be an opportunity for Japan to finally become independent, which was a little strange. He said, given Trump's America First mantra, he will have little interest in the United States-Japan or United States-South Korea relations, and that as a result, Japan will have to conduct its own foreign policy and find a skillful way to manage the power balance with China, Russia, and North Korea. Found that interesting too. He said, this should be a golden opportunity for Japan. We can take back the initiative and become a truly independent country. He also expressed frustration that 85% of Japan's skies are in fact America's skies, with a large portion of the airspace been reserved for the exclusive use of American forces since the end of World War II, and that U.S. military bases account for a substantial acreage of land too, a status quo he called abnormal. So I found it very interesting that one of our allies watching at the same time, there's been a lot of reports about them being upset and concerned that Thailand and Malaysia, their neighbors, had formally applied to BRICS. And so you have this growing movement in Southeast Asia moving towards BRICS, and they're presented with a dilemma. Which side do we favor? Here you got a guy saying we need to be more cognizant of our relationship with China, Russia, and North Korea. I found interesting. And then at the same time saying we can be independent. So I don't know. I find it interesting. Our sides being chosen. Is this a polarizing event, the election with Trump? And what does it mean for the future? I don't know. But I think it is something we should keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, I think that after World War II, it's on the record that the US has imposed all kinds of restrictions on Japan. And I think that it's no accident that Japan's gold reserves are not the greatest in the world. Its central bank has historically preferred foreign currency assets, especially US Treasury bonds. I'm sure there's been quid pro quo discussions around don't buy gold, buy our treasuries and we'll defend you. Of course, what happens when you take that away? Is that what he's referring to, I wonder?
I think it is. I think he's basically saying these countries need to start spending money to defend themselves, to stand on their own 2 feet, take the training wheels off, you could say. And it's interesting, he mentioned South Korea as well. The reality is, what the hell do we have military bases in these countries for anyway after all of these years? And we shouldn't have bases in Japan or in Germany or in South Korea or the hundreds of other bases that we have. And I think this is an interesting phenomenon because Jim Willey, a guy that I respect, he's a little bit out on the fringe, a little bit, and I say that with respect, but he gets information before a lot of people do. He's been saying for a year that Japan would join the BRICS. If they do, I will be blown away by him being right on this. But this is a very, I don't want to call it harsh, but it is a very aggressive statement coming out of a senior official, the senior guy right under the prime minister. So I think it says a lot that he's saying, look, we can become independent. We don't need the US anymore. This is a good thing for Japan. It's also very provocative as far as I'm concerned. And again, fragmenting the alliances, sides being chosen. And one of the major countries that has financed our lifestyle, as you said, through buying our treasuries, that they'd probably be better off buying gold instead of the treasury.
They've not. Japan is they own a lot of gold in Japan. I mean, I've been down into the gold stores in Tokyo, and they're fantastic. In fact, my from Jason to Jason present I'm going to buy myself one day is a 1 kilo solid gold Buddhist singing bowl. So you hit this thing and it rings. So I've actually heard the sound of gold, Andy. You might be the gold baron, but I'm maybe the gold orchestrator. I can hear the music of gold.
I like that. Yeah. But when maybe when gold takes off, I'll fly to China with you and we'll each buy one.
Japan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Japan.
We don't want to get arrested.
Yes, we don't want to get arrested. Japan.
But of course, we've been exporting our inflation to places like China, but also Japan. Is its export market to the US must be massive, and they must be thinking, what are we going to do now? We're going to have to start thinking about other strategies. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if Japanese manufacturers start setting up shop in the US. But I think that, but also you talked about taking control of their own defense. I think when the question of whether or not the US will come to protect a country comes into being, that actually creates a lot of weakness in the kind of physical situation on the ground. We've seen it in Ukraine, where effectively Putin has called the bluff of the West and said, I'm just going to walk into this country because what are you going to do about it? Are you going to attack me? I've got nuclear weapons. You've got nuclear weapons. Effectively, you're going to start World War III if you attack me directly. And actually what that means is that it's like his birthday. Now he can move into any country that doesn't have nuclear weapons and just take them over. Unless those countries start taking and investing in their own defense in itself, which might lead to greater prosperity. But I think the problem that I have, and I know a lot of the people in Japan have been talking about it as well, is that all this change and all this kind of economic confrontation could overspill into military confrontation. We've seen wars in the past start for economic reasons. And I know that the Japanese atomic bomb, the A-bomb survivors groups have called on Trump to try and build peace. We're in a very fragile world right now, and it does need some statesmanship. And I don't know, where does Trump's kind of flamboyant deal making and negotiating and positioning, where does that sit with, at the end of the day, we don't military conflict to escalate anywhere in the world.
No, we don't. But I would argue that the current administration, the one on the way out, has done more to damage this country than any external foe ever could have. And I think that what Trump is, he's far more logical than the current administration. And yes, he may be a little bit more heavy-handed, but by the same token, he's right on many levels. We have foot the bill for too much of the world, for NATO, for protecting the world, for being the policeman of the world, and giving money to the world at our own expense. So I don't have problems with this protectionist attitude. I don't at all. And peace through strength, I don't. And I would much rather have him in office than the current administration. But that's not without its own set of problems. And you're right, the world is getting a little bit more dangerous. And you pull away from NATO like he's talking, you're going to have every one of these countries have to start to protect themselves, to build their own military, to not rely upon others to protect him. And I also think it's very important to be optimistic right now from a standpoint of national pride and getting our culture back and the institutions back to gain confidence in this country. But it will come at the expense of massive inflation. There's no way around that. Even a reset, something has to happen. There's too much debt. Rates have to go higher. And if they don't keep inflating this system, it implodes. So there will be that moment, that day of reckoning. And I don't want to say that just because Trump is in office that everything gets better, but it's a lot better that he is in office. And we can start with making our country better from the inside out, and then hopefully get our monetary house in order. But even if Elon Musk comes in and slashes the hell out of everything, which he probably will, it's not going to amount to enough. It is more symbolic, but it is the step in the right direction. And I think that's really what I take away from the Trump election. It's a step in the right direction to get our spiritual, cultural, moral, social house in order, and then go from there. You can't do everything
Yeah.
in one bite. This is a good way to start.
Well, yeah, 50% of the country or 48% of the country would disagree with that. But I think irrespective of the politics involved, there's definitely uncertainty ahead. Warren Buffett, I wonder what he's thinking. He's got a record $325 billion now in cash or cash alternatives. He's moved out of investments. He's obviously concerned about something, or he thinks there's going to be a massive correction, and then he'll be able to pick things up on the cheap.
Yeah,
One
for
way or
sure.
the other, he's moved into a defensive position, hasn't he, or protectionist position. And I think that everybody needs to be able to do the same type of thing. They need to be able to think very carefully about what they're doing with their wealth. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how the volatility of the politics or these economic policies are going to have on the economy, and therefore on your lives. And therefore, that's why a lot of people are still going to be investing in gold, why governments are still doing it and businesses are still doing it. So I
This
would
is a
say
subsidy for the Southern Hemisphere. For the Far East, it is. It's a subsidy. We're driving down the paper price here in the West. You had a bunch of banks that were underwater, getting hammered with short positions, and this exuberance gave them the ability to normalize their balance sheets, or to at least get them in. Normalize isn't the right word, but to start to address the bleeding of these short positions. And you'll see that happen as the managed money starts to sell off their long positions and actually go short. This is something that I've been wondering how this would happen. But you look at a guy like Buffett. I'm also concerned about the $12 billion worth of Bank of America stock he sold. Does he know something about that? Wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me to see that be the sacrificial lamb that starts the ball down the hill in the banking crisis, to move everyone into a handful of banks to issue a central bank digital currency. I do believe ultimately we will see that. We will see a banking crisis that will wake people up to the realities of the over-leveraged, undercapitalized banking system that will consolidate a good number of these banks. And maybe Warren knows what's coming. He certainly is at the top of the food chain. But this is why Glint is, to me, such a great program. I would much rather have $100,000 in Glint than in the bank if I didn't need that money to pay my daily bills. And even if I did, here you go. You got a MasterCard that you can use to access it. It's a special program. It's an amazing technology. I've worked with Brinks for 20 years, where the metal is stored in Switzerland. I can't say enough about you, your firm, the technology, and the people behind it, including Brinks.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that it's an amazing alternative in a world that is never been more important to, I think, to be unconventional, if you will, and to think a little bit differently. We're not out of the woods by any measure just because Trump took office. It's a good start, but our financial ills are still in front of us that we need to address. There will be some pain involved in that, whether it be through a reset or a banking crisis or massive inflation that leads to higher interest rates, that leads to a lot of these problems we talk about. We're not through that yet, but at least we can start addressing the problems here at home, which have bothered me more than just about anything else. So I'm optimistic for that.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for those thoughts. And I think anybody really, you can't rely on central banks to be able to save you. You can't rely on any government to be able to save you. You've got to take control of your own life. You've got to grasp freedom and safety and security by by the neck. You can put yourself onto your own personal gold standard with Glint. And of course, you can also, it's important to have some metal in your hands at home, not just in your wallet
Absolutely.
with Glint. Miles Franklin, fantastic business you've built up over the years, Andy, that people can have gold bars and gold coins either vaulted or delivered to them. But do that. I think protect yourselves from the uncertainty that we're all facing, because we need to have a glint of hope. And I think gold does that for us. Gold glints is beautiful. And of course, it tends to maintain its purchasing power over time. Although the regulators and the compliance teams would have me point out that, of course, whilst we see the price of gold going up over the long term, it can go down too. So if you need that money tomorrow, don't be buying the gold if you need it tomorrow, just in case it corrects like it did temporarily, I think, just this week after
Good
the election.
advice and very true. Yet,
Yeah.
I will say your program is the technology is the best I've ever seen. If it's for the long run, I think you'll be glad that you allocated some funds to it. And it's really a cool technology too. So it's a cool way to be able to access it when you need it. It is special. And that's why I'm glad to throw my hat in the ring and stand behind it, which reminds me, Jason, I do podcasts. I did 8 yesterday, 6 today. I'm going to do another one this evening from a meeting I'm having with Robert Kiyosaki. I need a link from you so I can send it out to the world.
Yes.
A Glint link. Please send that to me as soon as possible, because I am passionate about getting the word out about your wonderful product, wonderful technology, and the good people behind it, including Brinks, who I have a special relationship with. And so please don't forget to do that. I want to get the word out as much as I possibly can to everyone out there. And I really
appreciate it, and I do. Thank you. And I think let's wrap it up there. I think everybody subscribe to the podcast. It's important for the algorithm to show more people and spread the word that you do subscribe. You give us the thumbs up. You make comments underneath the video. We'll read them. We'll talk about them sometimes. And if you haven't watched already, look at last week's podcast. We had Titus Gable on talking about free private cities. Yes, a city that doesn't have a government, that has a corporation that you contract with. And if you've got any questions or suspicions or thoughts about that, go and watch the video. There's a video we did on US state gold currency. We had one of the grassroots advocates that's really driving some of that at the Treasury and the legislative layers within different governments, state governments across the country. You just mentioned Robert Kiyosaki. We had him on the show. The list goes on. It's getting more and more interesting. We've got more and more guests coming on. So hit the subscribe button to make sure that you don't miss out on the next great podcast from the Resilient Compass. Have a great week ahead until we get to speak to you later. Andy, thank you very much. Great to chat
my
again.
Man. Look forward to seeing you and everyone else next week, and stay well.